what do stories that matter mean to me? Well, I think it's telling a story which aligns with your personal values. Coming back to my story, and writing these business reports and covering a $1 billion investment fund that was going into casinos and stuff like that, it gave me a glamorous fun lifestyle, but they're not my values. I don't really care. I didn't care about what I was writing. I didn't have any connection to it. So I think that's just to simplify it. We don't need to, a story that matters to me could be very different to a story that matters to you. But as long as it's all around fundamental human values, which resonate with you and are, of course, as long as they are just and fair and moral, etc., then that's the beginnings of a story that matters.
I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you for many reasons, but in particular, you have this thesis of the power of story, and so I want to jump into and dig into that. But before we do that, could you just give us a little bit of a background into your experience pre-Philippines and how you arrived in the Philippines, and then we'll build from there.
Sure. Well, I've always been a little bit the sort of the maverick in my family. So I studied languages, and the main reason at university I studied languages is that I loved traveling and exploring the world. So after graduation, I've ended up basically since then until today, I've lived in, I believe, 9 different countries, including the UK. And I had a whole host of jobs. My most recent one before I got into social enterprise was in writing reports, producing reports on emerging economies around the world. And so I was posted to South Africa and then Botswana and then the Philippines. And I was sent there to cover a $1 billion Qatari investment fund going into the country. It gave me quite a fun lifestyle, and there were lots of perks of the job. I got to travel. I got to write, which is something I was always into at the time. I still am today. And then I got to, earn some good money in the process. But it wasn't the most meaningful or purposeful work that I could find. So that's kind of the preamble, if you like, to eventually being posted to the Philippines about 10, 11 years ago. And that led to, I guess, what I'm doing today.
Okay. And so you found a good gig where you're able to travel, you're making some money, you're a young man getting out into the world. You arrive in the Philippines, and so at some point something happens which makes you decide, I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm gonna pack it all in, all this great thing that I've got going on, and I'm gonna completely change directions. What happened?
It was kind of a gradual process of becoming. It wasn't a term at the time, but sort of quietly quitting. Quietly or slowly becoming more and more disengaged with the work I was doing. In theory, as I said, it ticked all of the boxes, and yet fundamentally, the content I was creating didn't make sense to me, and I knew that deep down. And there was this little voice there that was saying, "Okay, Tom, yes, you get to, I don't know, have this reasonably sort of fun and even glamorous at times lifestyle, interviewing business leaders and politicians and whatnot. But essentially, there's no substance to it. And so this had been eating away at me for a few years, or at least a year.
Right.
And eventually, I arrived in the Philippines, and the level of disconnection between the kind of the rich and the poor, between the
Hmm.
haves and the have-nots, between what I was writing and what I felt was somehow true, that disconnection became so extreme that
Right.
I just had to do something else. And then I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen if I quit my job? I don't particularly like it anyway.
Right.
I thought, well, worst can happen. Stay on in the Philippines a little bit longer.
Hmm.
So I started a bit sneakily to use my role as a journalist at the time to get interviews with some of the most sort of interesting people in the social impact development space. And I
Right.
discovered an organization called Gawad Kalinga, which is a
Right.
big
Which is a
Filipino
huge
NGO.
organization.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you just give a little bit of background into who they are?
Sure. So they began, I don't know, 20 years ago. They're a Filipino grassroots organization, which began with a mission to eradicate poverty in the Philippines,
Hmm.
one house and one community at a time. So they were able to um, gather sort of, or see this convergence of society in the Philippines, where they were able to bring together politicians, businessmen,
Hmm.
students, and community members, those that are homeless and
Yep.
landless in the Philippines, all
Hmm.
together. And they somehow made kind of, I don't know, volunteering and house building sexy. And they got all these people together, and they began this movement essentially to end poverty. And so in 10 to 15 years, they were able to transform about 2,500 informal settlements across the
Hmm.
Philippines into these colorful communities with values. And of course, each community had its issues and continued to do so. No community was perfect, and or continues to be.
Yep.
And yet, um, there was something very authentic about their work, I felt at the time, and
Yep.
very inspiring. Meeting, you'd be on a building site and you'd see, all of these community members that were building homes for themselves, or maybe somebody else had previously built a home for them, and they were like, okay, we're now going to pay it forward for the next person, right? There was this sense. There's this Filipino value called bayanihan, which kind of means active solidarity, active
Right.
cooperation. Not just like a hashtag, I'm with you, bro, sort of thing. It's like, no, I'm actually willing to spend my weekends building houses alongside you. So that sense of
Yeah.
power of presence, there's nothing more important than being there and spending time with people who are in a less fortunate situation to you. So that just really inspired me. So I spent a year sort of visiting their work and staying in their communities all across the Philippines. And then I wrote a book on those experiences. So suddenly, from writing this kind of PR, schmoozing with people and writing some PR type article, I was telling the stories of people who had, survived typhoons,
Hmm.
or who had chosen a path of peace, having previously done all kinds of not so wholesome stuff. And it was just really inspiring to connect to these stories. Yeah,
And so, because you interviewed the founder of Gawad Kalinga, Tony Melotto,
that's right.
and was it in that engagement that really sort of something changed, and or was it him, or was it his story, or was it the organization? Sort of, can
Yeah.
you?
I think
Was there
it's an
something?
interesting one. It's not like I went into that interview, thinking I was going to do one thing in my life and then suddenly everything
Right.
changed. I was
Sure.
already looking for something, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I sought out an interview with him, because I thought I'll use my name as a journalist to be able to meet
Sure.
him and whatnot. I think obviously he was a very charismatic leader, and very had a brilliant way with words, and a vision, a brilliant vision. I think, to be honest with you, what really inspired me was the or were the people that I could relate to.
Okay.
Because they were the ones that inspired me to actually change my life direction. There were loads of other inspiring stories out there, but of course, you can
Sure.
have an inspiring story. You can watch a video on YouTube and be like, "That's a really cool story," but I never
Right.
see myself doing that thing as much as I
Mm-hmm.
may have respect for that person. So I think what really motivated me at the time was there was this sort of this community of young entrepreneurs who were driven by something that went beyond just profit. It was the first time I learned
Yep.
what social enterprise was,
Right.
and all these people who seemed really purpose driven. They were poor as hell.
Yep.
Some of them like living in, I don't know, grotty basements and on a farm with
Mm-hmm.
no aircon or whatever, but they were driven by a purpose, and I wanted a sense of that myself, I think. And so they were
Sure.
the ones that I could see myself. They became my role models, even though some of them were younger than me.
Yeah.
And I would say that was what kept me at the work, as opposed to just visiting the work, talking about it, writing about it, and then going back to my life doing whatever else. It was the people that I could really I could see myself in to an extent.
Okay. And so you start writing a book
Hmm.
called The Genius of the Poor, or do
Hmm.
you start traveling and a book starts to sort of manifest as you're traveling? So which way round did that come?
Yeah. It was actually, so it's Tony Melotto who coined that phrase, and he was the one. I think he had quite a skill at the time for like identifying people that were looking for something purposeful to do, or
Right.
uh, in their careers or whatever. And so he said you should write a book. He said you should write a book about the I think he used the term miracles of solidarity, or this kind of thing, right? He was like, we're doing a lot of work around the country. There's lots of interesting people you could meet. So I think I kind of started the journey already with the idea that I would write something,
Mm-hmm.
um, and because that was essentially what at the time I thought I was good at. That was my main
Good at.
skill.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
I didn't know exactly what form it would take. I didn't know, I didn't have a title for the book, or I didn't have any. It was more sort of a sense of curiosity and the sense of let's see what comes out of this, see what I can, tell the stories. I wrote in some blogs, I wrote in some local newspapers across
Mm-hmm.
the Philippines, like national newspapers. So I was contributing articles and stuff like that, and then. Um, uh, but yeah, there was always a view that something more concrete would come out of that. I just wasn't quite sure what it was at the beginning.
Right. And so buried in or hinted at in the title, there's something that you were seeing in the people that you were meeting. Uh, that it seems to be something that you're seeing that's really interesting. That's beyond just the solidarity pieces.
Mm.
There's some value there. What is it that you're seeing, and that sort of formed the basis of the hypothesis for your book?
Yeah. I mean, again, I didn't know. I was sort of invited to go out and discover this genius, and I didn't really know
Yeah.
what
Right.
at the beginning. For me, it goes beyond. First of all, it goes beyond pitying the poor, right?
Right.
It really, at least I ended the journey, or I mean, I'm still on that journey today, right?
Yeah.
Of having huge respect and admiration for people who are not born into such fortunate circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
um, and yet are able to make something of their lives. I remember I met someone very early in my journey who was he'd been surviving on the streets of Manila at the age of 12 with nothing. He had run away from home. His family were in the south of the country, and because he had an abusive father and stuff. And he was 12 years old, surviving on his own. Picking out from Kentucky Fried Chicken, outside Kentucky Fried Chicken, the bones of like someone else's leftover over food.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than seeing that type of person as just an object of my charity, I became amazed as I got to know him, and he's still a friend today, at how he was first of all able to survive, then he
Hmm.
was able to thrive. And today he's a community leader and he's a
Right.
community organizer, and he's working with other young people. And but it always made me think, well, if I had been born into those circumstances and that was my lot in life, can I confidently say that I wouldn't have turned to crime?
Right.
That I wouldn't have looked for dole outs? Of course I
Right.
can't. Um, but then it was this genius. So there's different layers of it, but when given an opportunity and when given the support, um, you know, the people that I were meeting in many cases were doing everything they could to make the most of that opportunity because they knew it's the only opportunity they had. So I
Right.
think that level of resourcefulness, the level of innovation I saw. So it's
Mhm.
easy for us in the West to throw money at problems, and to try again. We have a budget, whatever, to solve a problem, and maybe we have a few options about how to solve it, or maybe we don't need to necessarily solve that problem in the most frugal way possible. Maybe, and yet, whether it be on a very very minuscule level, the same guy I was just telling you about, he was, when I first met him, making he had made a little business out of um, sort of bonsai trees that he'd seen a niche market to sort of cultivate bonsai trees and then to sell them,
Right.
and who would have thought of that? And yet he was
Right.
making meat for it. So it could be on a very sort of smaller level like that, to the social entrepreneurs and that I met that were creating products, and
Hmm.
they weren't necessarily the very best products in the market, but given the resources they were dealing with, they showed a level of innovation which we can all learn from, actually. And
Yeah.
if we can
Right.
take that approach to sort of frugal innovation,
Right.
uh, to solve
Frugal
something
being a very key word there.
exactly, then just imagine how we could become more efficient at solving problems that also affect us in other countries where perhaps the resources are more plentiful.
Yeah. No, excellent. And so you finish writing this story. It becomes quite successful, and then following that, I'm guessing you're sort of doing a bit of a tour to promote your ideas, and there's a lot of excitement, and that carries on for a while. But then after a while, I'm sure you sort of start to come back down to reality, and you're then thinking, well, what next? And that then leads directly into mad travel, or had you already started thinking about that?
Yeah. So the book was reasonably successful, I would say,
Yeah.
given the given where I was starting from and the topic, and it was even published into a few different languages and stuff like that. And yet, um, I realized pretty early on that I wasn't going to make a full time living out of the book.
Okay. Okay.
So but it was partly that. I could have gone back to my more sort of mainstream journalism that I've been doing before, but again, I didn't particularly want to do that. And I think it was
Right.
the
Sure.
the social entrepreneurs that initially inspired me. And I think, at first I was like, what can I do? And I had this idea of setting up some financing platform for social entrepreneurs,
Okay.
because I saw all these entrepreneurs that had brilliant ideas, but they had no money.
Hmm.
But then, I realized I didn't really have any background in that. I didn't the tech side of it, funding social enterprise. I had no idea really what I was doing.
Right.
And so well, I started talking to people and reflecting on it, and then tourism seemed like a natural fit for me because, of course, I've been traveling all over the world already.
Right.
I love doing that. I had connected to so many communities across the Philippines that had real potential to
Hmm.
welcome uh, tour. Because I started thinking, well, how might we provide more opportunities for people to connect to communities in a similar way to what I had been fortunate to do. Because all of
Right.
these social entrepreneurs I met were moved by either a person they met or an experience that they'd had. And
Yeah.
so it
Sure.
got me thinking, how can we create more experiences in a slightly more purposeful way on a slightly bigger scale to, what I had?
Right.
Um, and so, yeah, the idea then was, don't just read about these communities, come and visit them for yourself.
Right.
Discover your own, discover what genius means to you through connecting to people and hearing people's stories and maybe collaborating with them. So that's what we started, a sort of travel platform which
Hmm.
had which is called Mad or Make a Difference Travel, and the focus was half of it was on uh, community development. So seeing, sitting down with communities and seeing where they wanted to go and where they needed more support,
Hmm.
and then using tourism as a means to finance those initiatives, while at the same
Yep.
time um, providing the opportunity for people to become connected to these communities and to have their own kind of transformative experience. So it was kind of trying to create impact on two levels. There's the community side where you
Hmm.
you train a community to run tourist programs, anything from homestays to cooking classes
Yep.
to tour guiding, culture lessons around culture, etc. And then so that's what the community are trained to do, and
Hmm.
then they are able to generate revenue through the income that brings in. And then on the guest side, you have the opportunity to see issues through somebody else's perspective, learn about local culture, learn about sustainability through the lens of local people.
And I guess that's why you reached out to Excel Josan in People in the Sea in Malapascua. She runs a
Yep.
great ecotourism sort of
Yeah.
experience with what's it called? House stays, homestays,
Hmm.
where you stay with the local fisher communities, and that's been very successful for her. And
Yeah.
so, how did Mad Travel evolve, and was it ultimately successful?
Um, yeah. So it's still going strong today.
Hmm.
It grew pretty quickly, actually. We've saw a real opportunity. I think at the time when we started, sustainable tourism was very underdeveloped.
Right.
Um, so you mentioned Axel and People in the Sea. I mean, they began in 1 or 2 years after us, I think. But it
Right.
was you could count on maybe a couple of hands the number of really sort of pioneering sustainable tourism organizations in the Philippines
Hmm.
at the time. So we
Right.
were able to grow quite quickly. We
Yep.
worked with corporate audiences, schools, universities, individual travelers from around the world, um, and it was great. We took a big hit during COVID, as you can imagine, and there
Yeah.
was
Sure. Right.
no support for companies like us
Yeah.
at that time. No, in the UK we had a furlough scheme, where companies were kept alive
Hmm.
uh, temporarily, thanks to the government. Of course, there was none of that really, or nothing that made a meaningful difference to our business. So
Yeah.
also around about this time that or actually, it was, truth to be told, a little bit before COVID when we already started to look at um, essentially how we could scale up our work a little bit more. And one way would be to uh, organize trips to other destinations around the world. But of course, that's very complicated, and we were a Filipino company.
Right.
Uh, that didn't suit us. But the other sort of limitation that we wanted to work on within our work at the time was that only people with the time and the money to actually travel could avail of the experiences that we offered. So it was always going to be a tiny proportion of the um, of our target market that could actually go on one of our trips. And
Yeah. Right.
even if you were to maximize, I mean, obviously there's a capacity wise, there's a limitation on how many people can visit a community and stuff like that. Not to mention, challenges with, if you're doing it on a big scale, say sustainability and all of those things related to travel. So
Exactly.
we thought, how might we recreate the travel experience,
Hmm.
but using technology? So the first stage of our pivot was to create what we call interactive video adventures. So we filmed the stories of our communities essentially as if you were there in person. You get to meet, you know, you get to choose who to speak to in the community. You get to choose what questions you want to ask. You get to choose where you want to go, what issues you want to
Hmm.
learn about, etc.
Yep.
It's like an interactive video basically, or video documentary. Um, and and then we would build curriculum around those interactive adventures. So it essentially became like a more fun case study for learning about global issues, anything
Yeah.
from
Sure.
deforestation to plastic pollution, to inequality, through the
Hmm.
perspective of local people. And again, the story, we kind of go big macro issues, but through a micro lens of an
Yeah. Yeah.
individual
I see that.
community member. And this way, we were able to grow empathy among our audiences. We were able to engage people in a way that just watching a YouTube video or just reading a textbook, you can't do. So that was kind of the first stage of our pivot, was to develop these, bring the Philippines to the world, if you like, through online interactive education and digital storytelling.
So you mentioned pivot. Sorry, and actually, I have a question just before that.
Yeah, yeah.
How did you build this? How did you get funding? Did you get outside funding? Did you fund it yourselves? Did you build it in the UK or in the Philippines?
Yeah. We actually got funding in the UK.
Right.
We now have two companies. We have one which is UK based
Hmm.
and one which is Philippine based. The Philippine company is the travel company for anything inbound to the Philippines.
Yep.
And the interactive education, online education company is based in the UK. Yeah, we were able to get some funding, some investment,
Cool.
to sort of develop and grow the idea. We've been able to scale it to a range of different communities, and and now we work with schools around the world that will never realistically actually visit the Philippines, but are able
Right.
to virtually visit.
Okay.
Um,
And you mentioned you used the word pivot, which often means that you sort of pivot and change direction. Did you um, stop doing the old thing, or was it just you sort of diversified and had two things going on at the same time?
Yeah, we diversified. So my business partner in Mad Travel, he kind of took the lead in Mad Travel, and I took the lead
Okay.
in Mad Courses, which is
Okay.
the sort of the spin-off that I've mentioned. There was obviously a time where travel was very much shut down. So RAF was also helping more
On the
also in
mad courses.
yeah. But nowadays, I'd say we're very much sort of focusing in different but complementary aspects of our mission.
Okay. Cool. And so you've created your first iteration of mad courses, these interactive story adventures. And how does that how are you delivering that? Because you mentioned sort of it's not just a YouTube thing. So how are people getting access to it, and how do you take it to market?
So we have courses that, like, basically a course platform you can sign
Yeah.
into. So I mean, we have some sample courses available, sort of open access,
Hmm.
but typically it's for school and university partners
Right.
and corporate partners as well. So it's normally our relationship is with a school that says, "Hey, we need to teach this in our curriculum," or we want to do something else. We need to teach sustainable development goals, or I don't know, some kind of change making or volunteering in our school. And so our
Okay.
courses will be availed of by the school and by the teachers, and then they will be delivered via the school to the students. So that's essentially how we kind of roll it out. It's just the easiest and the most effective way, I think, for us to achieve scale.
Yeah,
And
sure.
we partner with we've got international schools that essentially get, have budgets. They're private schools, and they get subscriptions. We have
Cool.
we have corporates that also sponsor us through either sponsoring us to create content, so to create courses, for example,
Yeah.
or sponsoring us to which their own employees can access.
Yeah.
Um, because a lot of the things we teach are very relevant for um, employees as well as for students, depending on how we adapt the content.
Yeah.
Or corporates can sponsor us to reach public schools, state schools, free of charge, essentially. So that way, we're able to sort of have impact at scale, but in a financially sustainable way.
Okay, so that's cool. I'm glad you said that those words, impact at scale, and that for me is what one of the things we're seeing in our day and age with the technology is, and the power of story is that idea of impact at scale. And so, how do you think about your impact? Because you got in this obviously for a purpose. It wasn't just about making it a technology company. You're
Mm.
now sort of selling. You're producing stories, interactive stories, which are then consumed online. A long way away from the people on the ground um, maybe you're sort of hoping to benefit. So, how do you start to think about? Do you start to diverge from your initial idea of impact, or have you managed to maintain that?
I
How do you think
think,
about that?
yeah. I think there's sort of primary impact for us, and then sort of secondary impact, which not, which we're either only partially responsible for, or it is a direct impact of the work we do, but it's not the number one point, where like leverage
Hmm.
point that we have. So for
Yep.
me, that primary area of impact is, it all revolves around storytelling and the power of stories. Um, because at the end of the day, all of us understand this planet we're on through the stories that we tell
Stories.
ourselves.
Exactly.
Um, it's very much an undervalued, when you consider just how important it is to every single decision we ever make.
Right.
It's almost undervalued in a way, as a skill. So I think if we are able, through the people that go on our courses, to first of all, to introduce them to different stories and to
Right.
encourage them to see issues through somebody else's perspective,
Hmm.
then I think that develops a really, really important skill, related to perspective taking.
Yeah.
Uh, and that will put us in a far better position to make decisions in life which, look after, or at least take into consideration, other people's perspective.
Yeah.
Even if they're acting foolishly, at least we'll kind of have a better, that skill of being able to understand why they're acting foolishly, even if we don't
Hmm.
agree with it, I think is very, very valuable. So there's that side of it, and then of course there's the aspect of people becoming storytellers themselves,
Yes.
of,
Right.
of being able to then tell stories that really matter, not just stories that grow our own sense of ego,
Hmm.
or our own, personal um, brand, or whatever that might be, right?
Yeah.
So
Right.
we all love making content. I say we all. Many people, young folk, let's say in particular, love making content generally, and yet, you know, to what extent that content is really creating a better world is debatable. Let's say. Um,
Sure.
so I think if we can look at coming back to your question around impact, I think if we can do those two things and do them well, then I think as a result of people being able to take and consider other people's perspectives better around important issues and be able to become more efficient at telling perhaps their understanding and telling their own story as well as the story of others, then there's lots of ripple or secondary benefit that can come from that, right? We can become more acquainted with issues that previously we didn't care about. We can perhaps better understand our role in addressing issues if we have one, or at
Hmm.
least we can take less personally, let's say, the actions of others that don't align with what we consider to be the right course of action, because we just see it's just somebody else's perspective, it's someone else's story, which I obviously don't agree with, but that's the way it is. And then if you're to ever
Yeah.
impact that particular perspective or that particular attitude, then at least you know what you're dealing with. So I think that would be where we look at impact, and of course there's secondary impact around,
Sure.
the result or the fruits of that work.
Yeah.
And it can be interpreted in many different ways, and in many different communities, it will be interpreted in a slightly different way. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, that's a long answer to a simple question. Well,
No, no, that's a good answer. One
yeah.
thing that you said there that I think is really critical is telling stories that really matter. And I
Mm,
think that's really, it's very interesting that you say that. I'm interested to know what that means to you. But maybe I feel like your next thing, which was Docathon, is somewhat
mm.
related to that idea of telling stories that really matter, and that's what you're presently working on now, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the next stage in our
Next
pivot
stage.
is
Yeah.
is okay, we've created some stories. We've built curriculum around those stories. It's a chance you can go on one of our interactive adventures and learn about communities across the Philippines. But
Hmm.
now it's the question is, well, how do we there's thousands, millions of stories of note around the world. I mean, everybody has a story in them,
Yeah.
even if they don't yet know how to tell it,
Right.
or they are connected to issues or individuals that have important stories to tell. Like, I mean, so in that sense, you say there's billions of stories out there, really.
Yes.
Um, and so, how do we replicate the sort of stories and say, look, you don't just have to go to the Philippines to discover these stories. They're everywhere. They're on
Right.
your doorstep, wherever you currently are watching or listening. There's going to be a story there. So that's what. So Docathon essentially is training people to go in storytelling and sort of introductory filmmaking skills to
Hmm.
go out into their local communities and to tell stories of local people through through their perspective, through these local perspectives. So
Wow.
it's
Cool.
challenging people to go out and to find an NGO or a social enterprise on their doorstep who actually cares about the issues that they care about, or at least that they're curious about.
Right.
And then to learn about the work, learn about the issue more, and learn about the story or the response of that organization. And in the process, of course, you're developing skills. You're developing all
Exactly.
kinds of skills related to content creation, filmmaking, interviewing people, presentation skills. So it's a way of um, skills development merged with actually making a difference in the world, which maybe comes to your next question on what does stories that matter mean to me? Well, I think it's telling a story which aligns with your personal values. Coming back to my story, and writing these business reports and covering a $1 billion investment fund that was going into casinos and stuff like that. It gave me a glamorous fun lifestyle, but it wasn't. They're not my values. I don't really care. I didn't care about what I was writing. I didn't have any connection to it. So I think that's just to simplify it. We don't need
Yeah.
to what a story that matters to me could be very different to a story that matters to you. But
Right.
as long as it's all around fundamental human values, which resonate with you and are, of course, as long as they are just and fair and moral, etc.,
Hmm.
then that's the beginnings of a story that matters.
No, that's I like that description. It's very simple and down to earth. Okay, so you've come on this big journey. You've written a book. You've created a social enterprise. You've pivoted a couple of times. You're creating movements. Um, where to next?
Mm. Um, well, we're launching a series of competitions in storytelling and filmmaking.
Cool.
So we have one docathon taking place right now, another one in the Philippines. We have another one taking
Hmm.
place in Mombasa in Kenya in a couple of weeks. We have another
Fantastic.
one taking place in Munich in Germany
Hmm.
next month as well. So I think we see we want to collaborate with organizations. So if there's anybody watching or listening who works for an NGO,
Hmm.
right? So we're very much interested in partnering with NGOs to help share or shine a light on the work they're doing and their voice.
Yep.
So I think that's the first thing. We want to
Yep.
collaborate with NGOs,
Hmm.
and we also want to collaborate with corporates who can fund us and sponsor us to get these stories told, either through them directly sponsoring the content or through them
Yep.
sponsoring students to create the content.
Yep.
So I think we're looking really at large scale partnerships at this stage. We've got
Okay.
a proof of concept. We've tested stuff out. We need partners that are interested in helping us to turn what we currently have into something that can really inspire and inspire people around the world, shine a light on important causes all over the world. And so in that sense, we're looking at wanting to train hundreds of thousands of students all over the world to go and tell thousands of stories or
Okay.
tens of thousands of stories on their backyard, and then to share those stories with others and to learn from each other's stories. So to create kind of a global community of impact driven storytellers.
It's a lovely vision. I love that. And so, if people wanted to get involved, either corporates or NGOs, where can they go to get in contact with you or with the organization?
Our website is madcourses.com. It's actually
Hmm.
a little bit out of date, but you'll get a flavor for what we're doing there. We're about to sort of do a bit of a revamp.
Hmm.
Um, Alternatively, my email address is tom@madcourses.com. Check us out on LinkedIn. That's where we're most active. So again, type in Tom Graham, or probably type in my email address or type in Tom Graham Philippines, and I'm pretty sure I'll come up.
Sure.
Funnily enough, Philippines.
Go ahead. I'll put some links down in the comments as
Oh,
well.
you're putting links then. Okay, so I don't need to
Yeah.
bother with that stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
reach out on LinkedIn. Love to hear from you. And as I said, if whether you're more on the impact side, and you have an interesting story to tell, or you want to
Hmm.
help connect us to people whose stories need to be told, or if you are connected to an education organization of some kind,
Okay.
definitely get in touch. or perhaps you're on the corporate side and you want to learn more about our mission and how it might relate to you, yeah, don't hesitate to reach out as well.
Okay, well, prepare yourself. You're going to be inundated by one or two of my 5 followers very, very shortly. Tom,
Love it.
it's been a pleasure. Just before we wrap up, what advice would you give to young social entrepreneurs out there right now who are sort of looking at the world and wanting to do something, but are maybe struggling to get started?
Okay, a few things. First of all, I mean, it would depend on why you're struggling to get started. Some people are
Right.
worried about failure, worried
Yeah.
about what might go wrong. My advice there would be um, look at the worst that might happen if it goes wrong, and then figure out if you can deal with that or not. So, it could be that you're in a time in your life where you're like, I'll give you the example of when I wrote my book. I remember at the time thinking, you know what, I'm pretty miserable in my career anyway. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to do something that sounds fun and exciting. There's a chance it fails. There's a chance that my book
Sure.
absolutely sucks and no one reads it, or people, use it as some sort of toilet paper or something.
Right.
But then I remember asking myself, well, would I be okay with that in the absolute worst case scenario that my book flops, or that I can't even write a book? Halfway in, I
Hmm.
realized I can't do it. And I realized I could, because I thought, well, you know what? Worst case scenario, I'll treat it as a 3 or 6 month gap year kind of experience. And then I can always go
Right.
back to the work I was doing previously or find something else. So
Right.
for me, it was perfect timing in that sense. And that really liberated me, because I thought, well, actually, what's the worst that can happen? I'll be fine.
Exactly.
But for someone else, it might, if you do that exercise, it might be that you have dependence, or you are
Right.
worried you just won't in any way be able to deal with the consequences. In which case, maybe, you know, now is not the right time to start your own
Right.
business or to get into social enterprise. So that's one thing. Another way, if it's not the right time, would be to volunteer for an existing organization. Mad, by the way, we're willingly we open our arms to volunteers or interns or mentors, whatever it might be. So that's also a way to sort of dip your or put your foot in the door and dip
Yeah.
your toes, that's the word, into this kind of world without making too drastic a decision just yet. And
Hmm.
I think the final thing would be just to make it fun. So
Yeah.
whatever you do,
Right.
keep it light. We live in a broken world with lots of things happening that could easily just get us depressed and make us stay depressed. Whereas there's actually an opportunity to, through social enterprise, to almost connect yourself to causes that you care about, but also organizations that are approaching it in a way that is not too, where appropriate and where possible, try to enjoy the work,
Yeah.
because next to your purpose, it can be enjoyable and it should be enjoyable, even if it's not always easy and maybe not always pleasant. But so uh, yeah, try and keep it fun. If you already have a social enterprise, look at how you can inject more fun into your work, because I think that's what's kept me going over the years.
No, that's great advice, and I'm very conscious that your oven is going to start beeping any second
Yes,
now. So thanks
yes,
very much, Tom. I'm going to end the video now, and then if you could just hang on for 1 minute because I need the syncing to happen. Thanks, Tom.
thank you. Thanks for having me.